colleagues, friends, fellow Ugandans and countrymen, I want to greet you and thank you for whatever you do and the care you care for our country. Today I want to address an issue that many of you have been asking me to address and to discuss it in the Queen's language, because when I discussed it in Uganda, many colleagues were left out and they felt they wanted to have my input. And this is the issue of Uganda's debt burden. Today, as you must all aware, every Ugandan has a debt on his own, which is about 1.5 million Uganda shillings. Even a Ugandan who was just born today has the same debt. Even a Ugandan who is dead, and if the Muslims were to use their Quran, many of our dead will not be able to be buried because they must pay the debt before they are buried. So 1.5 million is on your head. You might be singing NRM, you want 1.5. You must be opposition, or those ones who say they don't care, they don't mind what happens. 1.5 million Uganda shillings is your debt. But let's understand it this way. For the last 5 years, our debt has increased by 107%. 107%. In 2018, Uganda's debt was 41.4 trillion. 41.4 trillion, that was Uganda's debt. 2020 to 23, our debt has risen to the amount of 86.6 trillion Uganda shillings. You know, those can be numbers, but it's enormous, because that amount is at the size of 53% of Uganda's GDP. So if today the people who are demanding us money came, Uganda would close shop. All of you run away. Our sisters who are lucky who are in the Arab world will keep there. Because if you see the budget of Uganda is 51.9 trillion, but now this is 86%. We wouldn't be crying or lamenting because of that debt. If that money was borrowed and actually used to run or to engage in developmental projects, like if we don't have potholes that you are once seeing in Kampala, around Kampala, if agriculture, our farmers had inputs like their tractors, there's irrigation, their storage facilities, the farmers wouldn't be crying. If in schools we had inspectors, teachers are paid, children eating, having meals, having good classes and infrastructures, we would say our monies have catered for us. If in hospital you went and found their drugs, you find their medicine, you find their doctors that are paid well, you find their ICU, those of cancer, having the machines that are required, then you would say that our money is good to go. It's worth it to pay that kind of loan. But what happens is most of this money is swindled. I can give you an example of the BESIGYE Dam. The BESIGYE Dam has 250 megawatts, produces 250 megawatts of electricity. But that dam costed us more than $1 billion. A similar size of that dam is in a country called India, $250 million, but they paid an amount of 250 megawatts. They paid $250 million. That means where a Ugandan was given a dam of 1 billion, an Indian would have 4. Mark you, that is borrowed money. So the 3 dams that we should have got were eaten by people. And now that money was borrowed, we are paying. It is the reason the amount of money we pay for Yaka or electricity bills are very high. It is that money that has affected the interest rate in your loans. It is that money that has led to the depreciation of the currency of Uganda. Today, Uganda's currency is about 3,760 against the dollar. I must tell Ugandans that care. In 1991, Uganda was cleared of its debts to zero, forgiving us. About 2002, again they cleared and forgave us loans. And they said, you guys, you can settle. Now I heard after COVID, Mr. Museveni was again asking that they forgive him. Why? Most of this money, as I'll go, you see, there are 2 types of loans. If you want to get a good loan, they are what we call concessional loans. Concessional loans are these kind of loans whose terms are affordable. They can say the interest rate is about 4%, and then the grace period is about 40 years. So you pick a loan, you can't use it, but they start paying after 40 years. But if somebody would ask, why doesn't Uganda go for such loans? Of course they want to go for them. But the institution that provide those loans have stringent conditions. Most of these loans are attached to human rights and governance. You must protect human rights, you must have free and fair election, you must not beat up people, you must not use that money to buy guns. Now what is happening here is Uganda, they tell them your human rights records are what? Are bad. We are not giving you money. So at the end of the day, Uganda goes for commercial loans. Consumption loans, you find them in IMF, you find them in the European Bank, you find them in World Bank, African Development Bank, and COMESA. So those are cheap sources of money. And they always say, use this money for hospitals, roads, schools, and education in such sectors. Now what Uganda has resorted to is to go to places like China. In China, they have no conditions that are attached to human rights. If they give you a loan, they say, okay, you'll pay. But the interest rates are very high. Those Exim banks, they are very high. And then even before you use the money, you are paying interest rates. So in a country like ours, where the processes are stringent, the bureaucracy, because somebody wants to have this kind of deal and the procurement processes, we start paying interest rates even before we use the loans. If we went and looked into Uganda's budget, in the last year we've been paying about, I think about 8 or 9 trillion in paying interest rates. You remember in COVID, we picked a loan from the European Bank, and then we are given a loan of 2.2 billion euros. That money then, those who can go and check my YouTube, had run a calculation. And we say that if I use that money wisely, that money was enough to fix Uganda's health sector. Just enough. In that money, I would give you 39 hospitals. In the 96 we did not have. I was going to give you about 1,000 ambulances. I was going to give you about 2,000 ICUs. I was going to give you about 200,000 hospital beds. I was going to give you protective gears. So at the end of the day, as you pay the money, you go to hospital and then you find services. You see what is paining in this country is that we pay twice for every service. And it's the reason why most of our people are broke. You pay money so that government constructs a hospital. Government gives you a bad hospital and then you don't go there and you go to a private hospital. You pay twice. We expect this kind of money to go and construct schools. Government doesn't give you the right schools, you go to private. So you're paying twice. We pay money to have good roads. They don't construct the good roads, they are full of potholes. And then we say, we keep in the garage, fixing our cars. So that has really affected. Remember, there was even a time when we were borrowing money to wash hands. There was a time when Uganda was borrowing money to pay for staff workers. Really, if you are borrowing money to pay staff, that means there's a problem. And then we have a bloat government, 80 ministers. When the US only has 14 ministers, secretaries, for us we have 8. We have presidential advisors who actually not advise the boss. He actually comes and advises them. So in this kind of situation, we are bound to have a serious problem. Currently, our external debt is about 37 trillion. Now when you come to the local debt has its own problems. Because when the government borrows in the commercial banks, that means they are competing with the local businessman. So the interest on those loans goes high. So it creates inflation in the economy. It creates the increases in the cost of production. And then let me tell you one thing, fellow Ugandans. Even this money that you see, that they borrow, it is actually people who are in the government that buy those government bonds. Because they have amassed a lot of wealth. They've stolen a lot of our monies. So now when the government wants to borrow, it is them that come to borrow government, to lend to government. Those big ministers, those civil servants who are very rich, so they pick their money and lend to government at a rate they have decided. So if they are lending government at a rate similar to that of the World Bank of about 4%, that would be acceptable. But the rate at which these vampires, these hyenas, these thugs are lending to government is very high. So they steal our money directly, they come and lend it to us at an interest rate that they've decided. Recently there has been news that the government has decided not to borrow. But if I need not to borrow, they need about 3 years of not doing anything, but now paying. Today, every shilling of Uganda, 30 cents of which is 30%, is used to finance debt. So now the 70% is what is used to pay the bloated public service, I have told you, ministers and their allowances, and then very little for developmental projects. So in such a situation, you can't survive. Because almost all your money does not go to work on the people of Uganda. Because the current expenditure of this country is very high. Now what do they really need to do is what they go is we would call them like a two policy issue. They can still keep borrowing externally and then go for non-concessional loans, which I told you that have no human rights condition, but the interest rates are what? Are very high. Or even go to pick these loans which are commercial. You know, commercial banks, some other commercial banks, they will give you a grace period of months, or even others, their paperwork, the conditions they need, or the guarantee they need is very huge. for any Uganda, for government. But because these guys don't care about us, they'll always take that kind of money. Today tax to GDP ratio is about 13%. But you're in an economy where government gives tax waivers to its friends. About 9 trillion is tax waiver in our economy. Those friends will say, no, we have forgiven you. So and so we have forgiven you. So that would be money that would be used to pay some of these debts. That would be money that would be used to run some of the developmental projects so that you don't need to borrow. And then we even have these people who poorly negotiate these loans. It's like a deal. Somebody goes to a company, say, I want to borrow Uganda. Then the guy says, if you're borrowing Uganda, how much money do you give me? Today I just met a young man who told me, like, if you want to go to the this called microfinance center, there is a huge if you cannot give a huge kickback. The guy told me you can spend 2 years applying for the money, the processes, and they don't give you money. So the cartel that is into the debt business is high. Even to pay somebody who wants money, even to borrow, if an institution say, I'm lending Uganda this so much billion, there is a deal, and even that is covering the interest rate. So okay, so the guy says, I need this so much interest rate, and when somebody is asking for that interest rate, there is somebody somewhere, in the Ministry of Finance, in Bank of Uganda, somewhere in the State House, who benefits from that kind of loan. So now when the loans have become too big, in the book, No Longer at Ease, Things Fall Apart, of a renowned Ugandan writer called Chinua Achebe, Okonko, the son, had a father, Unoka. Unoka was a very lazy man. He used to pick a lot of debts. But whenever I would pick a debt from you, he would write your name on the wall. So whenever I would come and say, please pay me my money, he said, you see that list on the wall? Those are people who lent me money. But those first ones are not making noise. It is you making noise. And when I'm paying, I start from the top. And that is the kind of game Uganda is playing. Now, government has been servicing loan in what we call rolling back the debt or renewing the debt. Please wait. Please wait. So instead of paying the debt at the time of maturity. So when you spend a lot of time without paying the lender, what happens? You reach a situation that is called refinancing risk. Refinancing risk is a situation whereby that there is when you need money, and at that time when you need money, nobody is ready to lend you. Some of you have seen neighbors or friends you work with. Everybody at the workplace has lent him money. He has not paid. You go to the market, everybody has his money. You know, he keeps on the run. So in that kind of situation, that is where your Uganda is. Domestically, what happens is that if you go into the commercial banks, what will happen? What will happen that commercial banks will ask a bigger premium. A bigger premium that if you're paying an installment of about 100 million, the guy will say, now I want 500 million. So that premium is too huge for you. They will also increase the interest rate, because the interest rate comes in as a pay to the risk. Interest rate is the risk that if you the owner of the money benefits between that period when you cannot pay his money. So when interest rate is structured, factored in, that affects the private sector, because you go to the bank and they tell you now it is 20%. When you borrow money at 20%, you know you go to invest, and then when you go to put up your to add your profits, your goods become very expensive for buyers. When they become very expensive for buyers, is eventually what we call inflation. Or when people don't buy your goods, if they are not essential goods, we go in a situation of a recession or a complete breakdown of the economy. So that can really affect the private sector and economic growth. So many have been asking, what should a country like ours do? I think a country like ours should do, it must look at the mismatch between expenditure and revenue collection. Because you must not plan for two very big projects when actually your expenditure, when your income is very limited. You borrow money that you cannot afford. Government, if it were us in power, would reduce the ministers to about 20. Do you know how much money that I reduce if I went and sent 60 ministers home? If I went and sent other DCs home? If I went and sent some of the these guys if I went and sent some of the advisors, some of the other DCs, if I went and balkanized some of the districts and reduced that public expenditure, if I went and reduced the number of MPs to about 250, all of that will help me reduce expenditure, reduce the pressure. And even I go to the level of even asking those people that have not been paying taxes to go and pay taxes. I was even forgetting what is causing problems. The IGG 2 years ago was telling us that every year in Uganda's budget, 10 trillion of shillings is chiffoned or is stolen, eaten by 200 Ugandans. Those 200 Ugandans each takes home 50 billion. That is money that should have been giving you services. That is part of the money that is borrowed. That is part of the money that should have been paying debts. Or even the government must start negotiating some of the reliefs. It must also start trying to look at improving its record in as far as human rights is concerned, in as far as governance is concerned. Because when you improve the human rights record, we improve how you run your government, eventually those multinational financial institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the European Bank, like the African Development Bank, like the Commercial Bank, will be able, which is called the PTA Bank, will be able to borrow our country. But short of that, I want to tell you, this economy collapsed long time ago. When you have 40% of the people not in the cash economy, 67% as peasants, that means serious people in the economy, about 37%. Those cannot run an economy. Because however rich they are, if they put up businesses, those who should have been their customers do not have the necessary resources, the necessary money, or what we call effective demand to come and pay for the services they want. Some people have been looking at around the Easter holiday. You would pass through Kampala, people are not shopping, and this would be time for shopping. This is a festival, but people tell you, I can't shop. Kids are at home, have not gone to school. You see many people park their cars at home. So all that affects the economy. So the debt that we're having, it will even affect those that have stolen. They think they're okay, but it will affect them. I know it will collapse this economy. It will collapse them. Some of us who have nothing won't lose a lot. Those who have a lot will lose a lot. That's why you always say that the people of Uganda must rise up to the occasion and say enough is enough and see off this government. These people can even steal iron sheets and steal goats, steal everything. And they will tell you, where did the money come from? It was a given date from such and such a place. that goes to the homes of some of these people. I want to say thank you. We'll wait for your comments when they are, when you have them. We'll wait your criticism, because those are ideas that I have. You may also have ideas. The economics is like an ideology, how somebody thinks, how resources must be allocated. Because when you have a country that goes to pick a loan to pay another loan, then you know things are gonna be tough. Wish you luck. Love you. Have your be responsible citizen, and demand for the right services. Thank you.